Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you out there in the internet lands get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlin. I'm a Christian apologist coming at you from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. And on the other side of the glass is...
B.A. Thomas.
Woohoo! If B.A. and I look a little frazzled today, it's just because, well, we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. We won't go anywhere. It's been the last few days. Is that a fair way of putting it? The last few days have been the last few days.
I'm still recovering from the last few minutes.
He's not kidding. I mean, literally, we were doing a rehearsal for something, and we at the tech booth, and we both ran in here, and just went right on the air, basically. That's why we're a few minutes late today. We apologize. That's why. We literally had something else going on right up to the last minute. I was going to start out with a joke, and I'm not anymore. Because, number one, I'm not funny. No, but I was going to say something like, all I want for Christmas is one more subscriber, because we were at 1,399 subscribers, and I'm OCD, and I hate that. But then when I logged in to get us on the air, we were at 1,400.
Oh,
so,
good.
Yay! Woo. But now, as a result of that, somebody's going to unsubscribe just to annoy me. I know, that's the way the internet works, right?
That is the way the internet works. It's very unforgiving.
So anyway, welcome to the show. If this is your first time watching, let me tell you a little bit about what it's all about. We get questions that can be submitted to us either online or in other ways. And I ask them. The entire show is viewer driven. So the topics for each week are determined by what you want to hear about. If there is something you want to hear about, anything that has to do with Jesus, the Bible, Christianity, God, world religions, anything like that, then you can submit it to us. And the way you can get us your question is by going to our website, which is trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. On that website, there is a form that you can fill out. Go ahead and fill out that form with whatever question it is that you would like us to consider answering here on the air, and we would be happy to do that. What I have explained in the last few weeks, what we've been doing, is I also teach 7th grade Christian education here at the school. And a couple weeks ago, I handed out some cards to all of my students and had them write down what their questions were. And so we are working our way through some of their questions right now. Again, that doesn't mean we can't take a break from that. If you have a question that you want to submit, go ahead and submit it, and we can kind of, interrupt and stop the normal routine of things and answer your question if it's something that we feel is appropriate and right for the show. Also, if you do like the show, please do me a favor. Go ahead and click the like button on this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and comment. Comment, especially if you're watching us live. We are live right now, 3 o'clock Eastern time. And if you are able to watch us live, go ahead and put your comment in the comments section, either on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel or Trinity Joppa Facebook page. And either BA or I will see it. Technology has not been our friend these last few days. Let's just say that. For a couple guys that work in the field of technology, I'm only speak for myself that I want to destroy it all right now. Things have not gone according to their specs. We'll say that.
Actually, Ken?
Yes.
Just to make sure it's working, can I have everyone who's listening tell me what their favorite Christmas ornament is? Just to make sure it's working. Just go ahead and type it in.
Tell me what your favorite Christmas ornament?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to answer? Because now I got to think.
I mean, you can too. What
is my favorite Christmas ornament? I feel like I should. Well, I do have several Batman ornaments. So those are always winners.
Pretty good.
Well, here's the other thing. I have and I'm not going to. We have a whole tree. We have two big Christmas trees we put up. One has all of our family ornaments on it, and the other one is our Disney tree. My wife and I went to Disney World for our honeymoon. Back in, I won't say when, I'll get in trouble for that. And we've been done several times since then, and we were always very big Disney fans. I've had some softening on some things Disney lately, especially as we had and not just the things people out there in the world are thinking of, that's making all the news, but, we did take a Disney trip this past summer, and I won't go into details because the mouse tends to sue people. So, our review of this last Disney trip would not have been as, epic as our review of our previous Disney trips. Let's just say that. But anyway, we have a whole tree that's nothing but Disney ornaments. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's pretty cool because I grew up on Star Wars, and they bought Lucasfilm. So now we could put all the Star Wars ornaments on the Disney tree and all the Marvel superheroes and all that. Yeah. So I will cop out of your question. I'll just say my entire Disney tree is my favorite ornament.
Great answer.
All right.
Okay.
What about yours?
Okay, this is oddly specific, and it will mean nothing to anybody else, but it's my favorite. That's why I ask it. One year we went to, I forget the name of the place. I have a memory of a goldfish, but it's something Farms in
Pepperidge Farms.
Not Pepperidge. Love those guys, but not Pepperidge. It's an owl holding a clock. I just like the way it looks. It's, I think, the first ornament that I picked up with my wife. Like, it's covered in glitter. The owl's kind of chubby. It's got kind of a father time, or maybe like son of time kind of feel to it.
Or owl time.
It is owl time. It is a superb owl, and it's glittered in white with a very light blue, and I just like the way it looks.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. I haven't even put up my tree yet. I got to do that. So.
Same.
Anyway, so tell us what your favorite ornament is. That'd be great. In the meantime, while you're telling us what your favorite ornament is, I will tell you what we're going to be talking about on the show today. How's that?
Sounds good to me.
So the question that we had submitted, well, you tell them what question. You're the one that chose it.
That's true. I did. Today's question is, when do you think the rapture will happen? Will it be during the 7 years of... I'm sorry. The echo. Will it be during the 7 years of darkness?
All right. So that is a good question. We're going to answer. BA, do me a favor. Get on YouTube. Same thing I asked you to a few weeks ago. We have a...
Yes.
Yeah.
We have
All
a
right.
guest.
There we go. So, all right. So this was kind of funny because they, for those of you who don't know, the way we're handling these questions that are submitted by the class, the students in the class, is I collected them from the students. I didn't even look through them all, to be honest. I just handed them over to BA and Sarah Garner in our office. And each Monday, I basically have them pull out, the cards and look at them and decide what they think the next subject should be. And then they tell me. So I don't get a choice in the matter. I got to answer the question whether I want to or not. So that makes this show fun sometimes, let me tell you. And this time, the questions they've asked me in the past, it's like, okay, sure, yeah, good, let's go. That, no problem, roll with it. A lot of these things, basically, I'm a Christian apologist, I could answer in my sleep. I still prepare. I always prepare for everything. This one, well, I think I explained to BA earlier, it says, this is a question that, yes, I can answer, and it's part of my education, I've taken my training, I've done my studies, but it's not like at the very top of, what I usually deal with and what I usually handle. So this is one that I confess is like, yeah, I got to take out those systematic theology notes again and give myself a quick refresher on some of the Bible verses and everything like that and the arguments that we were talking about. And as we'll talk about in a second, you'll see there's a lot of history behind this question as well. So I've got to give you a little bit of history lesson. So talking about when will the rapture happen? Will it be during the 7 years of darkness? If these terms don't sound familiar to you, I mean, generally speaking, by the 7 years of darkness, I assume the question is talking about the tribulation. All right, the Great Tribulation we hear a lot about, the supposed future event, the 7 years coming in the future where things are going to be really, really bad. So before I answer, in order to answer that question, I want to explain to you not only where it comes from, all right, but that requires a little bit of a history lesson so you understand the biblical scriptures behind this that people look at and say, oh, I think there's going to be a 7-year tribulation period, and I think there's going to be a rapture. And we are going to start with King Solomon. Now, if you remember Israel, you had King David had a son named King Solomon. All right, King Solomon, very wealthy, said he wasn't going to cut the baby in half. Some of the stories, okay? King Solomon he was the last king, actually, to rule over a unified kingdom of Israel, all right? He died in about 926 BC. And after he passed, some tensions arose between the 10 tribes that were kind of the northern tribes in the northern part of the land and the tribes that were down to the southern part of the land. And the southern part of the land included the city of Jerusalem. That was in the southern tribes, all right, specifically in the land of Judah. Now, in about 930 BC, all right, roughly, the nation split. All right, the nation of Israel split. The northern tribes continued to be known as Israel, so they were their own separate kingdom of Israel, and the southern tribes became known as a kingdom or the nation of Judah. All right, so they were now, what was one nation is now two. All right. Then in 722 BC, The northern kingdom, which again was now being called Israel, was actually conquered by the Assyrian Empire. And a lot of its people were forcibly displaced. They were taken out of the land. If you're familiar at all with the New Testament, you ever heard of the Samaritans? You know, the story of the Good Samaritan, and you know there was these people called the Samaritans that the Jews didn't really like. This is where they came from. What happened is the Jews intermarried with the Assyrians, and as the result was this group of people known as the Samaritans, who had a lot of the practices from Judaism that they still retained, but some things that they did not. And obviously, since they didn't have Jerusalem in their part of the land, they didn't have access to the temple and things like that. So they came up with different types of worship. And so the Samaritans and the Jews had very similar practices, but not identical practices, and that caused a lot of tension as well. But that's where the Samaritans came from. When the northern nation of Israel was conquered, they were displaced, they intermarried with the Assyrians, and the Samaritans were the result. Now, and then in 586 BC, the southern kingdom, Judah, was conquered by the Babylonian Empire. All right? And when the Babylonians came in and they conquered Jerusalem, all right, they destroyed the temple and they destroyed the walls. You know, whenever you have a city, you have these fortified walls that surround it, all right? They destroyed those fortified walls, which makes the city basically defenseless. So Jerusalem was left pretty much in ruins after the Babylonians conquered it. And again, the people of Judah were forcibly dispersed out of their homeland, and they were made to live elsewhere. All right, that's the setup. All right, that's the setup. And I know you're saying, well, Ken, why are you giving me this big old history lesson to talk about what's going to happen in the future? Hold on, we're getting there. All right. So in 549 BC, all right, the Babylonian Empire, the one that had conquered Judah back in 586, all right, in 549 BC, the Babylonian Empire actually fell to the Persian Empire. So now we have a new empire takes over, and it's ruled by Cyrus the Great, all right? Now, Cyrus actually decided to release the Jews. All right, they were held in captivity. He says, I'm going to release you. And he gave them permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. All right. Now, this is all told in the book of Ezra. So if you open up your Bible, you read the book of Ezra, you can read all about this. Now, what's key about this command, however, is that it was just to rebuild the temple. Remember I said the temple was destroyed and the walls surrounding the city were destroyed. All right. Cyrus did not give permission to rebuild the walls. He only gave permission to rebuild the temple. All right. Now, after Cyrus, there was another king called King Artaxerxes. All right. Now, Nehemiah, that name should sound familiar, also a book in the Bible, so you can read about this in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah actually asked King Artaxerxes for permission to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. All right. And Artaxerxes said yes. All right. Now, there's some disagreement about exactly when that event happened, but as you'll see as we go through this, that's a very key event. When did King Artaxerxes give permission for the walls of Jerusalem to be rebuilt? All right. Now, we know, if you read the book of Nehemiah, we know from Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1, that this command or this permission was granted in his 20th year, the 20th year of his rule. The question then, of course, is when was the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' rule, right? Well, some say it was 444 BC. Others say it was 454 BC. I'm kind of going with the 454 BC model myself, and you'll see partially why here in a little bit. But let's say that King Artaxerxes gave this command and said it's okay to go back and build the walls of Jerusalem, rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in 454 BC. All right. Why is this all important? What does this matter about a future 7-year tribulation period? All right. Well, the reason is because that idea, the idea of there being this future 7 years of tribulation, it comes from a prophecy in the book of Daniel. All right. Daniel chapter 9. I'm going to read to you a little bit of Daniel chapter 9, starting with verse 20. All right, I'll read 20 and 21, then I'm going to pick up again at verse 24, and we're going to read this prophecy. All right, now, this may sound a little bit weird to you as we're reading it. Don't worry, we're going to break it down. I'll show you exactly what Daniel is saying here. All right, but here's what he says in chapter 9. This is Daniel speaking himself. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to the Lord my God for his holy hill, while I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in the earlier vision, the angel Gabriel, came to me in swift flight about the time of the evening sacrifice. And then skipping to verse 24. 77s, this is what Gabriel's saying to him now, okay? 77s, not the number 77, but 70 groups of 7, all right? 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come to destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. All right. Some Bible translations refer to this as weeks. They say Daniel's prophecy of 70 weeks. Others say, like the NIV here, just 77s. Technically, the proper word-for-word translation would be sevens. It's just 70 groups of 7 of some sort. Now, we do see throughout the Hebrew Bible that, yes, sometimes obviously it talks about weeks of 7 days, like the creation and all of that. It does talk about, 7 days. Other times it does talk about weeks of years. You may be familiar with the story of Jacob. Jacob wanted to marry Laban's daughter Rachel, and he had to agree to work for Laban for 7 years in order to do that, and then Laban tricked him and all that. But when that period of 7 years is referred to in Genesis chapter 29, it's referred to as a week. So we see examples of weeks of days and weeks of years, all right? So where does this idea of a tribulation, a 7-year tribulation, come from? You're probably starting to see it already, all right? If we look at it from a perspective of weeks of years, then Daniel's prophecy, all right, has 3 periods of weeks, or 3 blocks of 7-year period. He says there's going to be a 7 block, all right, a 62 block, and a 1 block. All right, that he's referring to. And I want to say this before we go any further. And in case anybody wants to suggest that this was, when you see where this is going, you want to say, well, this clearly was written after Jesus was born and somebody went back and did all the math. No, it wasn't. We have physical copies of the book of Daniel that are older than Jesus. All right, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have copies of this book that are older than come from before Jesus was born. So you cannot say this was written after the fact. That is impossible. We literally have copies that are too old for you to make that argument. So throw that one out the window. All right. Now, let's take a look at these periods of time that Daniel is talking about in his prophecy. All right. First of all, he says there are going to be 7 sevens, which is a 49-year period of time, right? And 62 sevens. 62 sevens is 434 years. So a total of 483 years. All right. From when? Well, the starting point, remember, was from the point when the command was given to rebuild Jerusalem. That's why that whole history lesson was important, all right? When did King Artaxerxes give the command to rebuild Jerusalem? Well, I'm telling you that was 454 BC, all right? Well, if we take 454 BC and we go out 483 years from that, guess what we get? 30 AD, all right? That year might sound familiar. We'll get there, okay? So, during the first period of 7s, during the first 49 years, what's happening? That's when the walls of Jerusalem are getting built. So he's basically saying from the date the command happens, over the course of that first 49 years, the walls of Jerusalem are going to get rebuilt. Yep, that happened. All right. Then there's going to be this another block of time. All right. And then what's going to happen after that second big block of time that takes us up to the year AD 30, if these are weeks of years? All right. Well, it says that the anointed one, and the anointed one, just so you know, that's another translation for that is Messiah. That's what Messiah means, all right? It says the Messiah is going to come, and he's going to be put to death. Anybody know what happened in AD 30? Jesus was crucified. Yeah, exactly.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
That's about right. That's about right. So you can see where this reasoning starts to come from. The math kind of works out pretty darn well. All right. Now, that's 69 of the 70 weeks. All right. There's still one more period of 7 years that Daniel's prophecy hasn't gotten to yet. However, if you look carefully at the prophecy, what Daniel actually says, he gives you another starting point. Remember, the starting point of those first period of sevens, he said, was the order from King Artaxerxes, right? But then the prophecy, he says, there's another thing that has to occur prior to that last period of 7 years, all right? A couple things he actually says in that time frame. One thing he says that's going to happen is that the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. All right. So at some point after those 69 weeks, the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary, the temple, are going to be destroyed. Did that happen? Yup. AD 70. All right. The Romans destroyed the temple. There's never been a temple there since. All right. So Daniel says that was going to happen at some point after the 69th week, and it did. He also says that before that, in order for that last week to happen, we'll talk about who he is in a minute. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. All right. So the triggering mechanism, the starting point, the way you know that last period of 7 years has begun is whoever this he is going to confirm some kind of a covenant for 7 years. All right. It's going to be a 7-year covenant. And of course, people that adopt this theology will say that he is the Antichrist. All right, that the Antichrist is going to come. There's lots of little Antichrist, but the capital A Antichrist is going to confirm a covenant with the nation of Israel for 7 years. All right, and deceive many. That's the reasoning, the logic behind it. But they say that there is a gap between week 69 and week 70. They don't start right away. And we can know there's a gap because if you look in Daniel's prophecy, he describes things happening in between week 69 and 70. So we know that they don't flow directly right into each other. All right. So what that 70th week is what people think is going to be the Great Tribulation. This 7-year period that's going to come in the future after the Antichrist enters into some kind of a covenant with the nation of Israel. That's going to be a period of a lot of bad stuff. Why do I say that? Well, number one, look at how some of the things that Daniel talks about in there. All right. He says during that 70th week, in the middle of the 7, so 3.5 years into that 7-week period, this Antichrist, or the he, will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. All right, so he's going to do some bad stuff to the temple. But this isn't the only Bible passage that deals with this idea of a tribulation period. Another one is from Jesus' own words, actually. We look at Matthew chapter 24, starting in verse 15. Jesus specifically references this prophecy. So this isn't one of those things where we're trying to connect the dots, says, well, is Jesus really talking about the same thing Daniel was? Yeah, he is. I mean, he flat out says he was. All right. If we look here in verse 15, Jesus says this. He says, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. And he goes on. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So Jesus gives us some more information about what the world is going to be like during this 70th 7. And one thing we can tell, if Jesus is referencing it, All right. He's referencing, he said, look, when this abomination that causes desolation happens, well, that tells us that Jesus' understanding was that 70th week hadn't happened yet. All right. Because he's talking about the fact that something that Daniel describes as happening in the middle of that 70th week. All right. So Jesus tells us it hadn't happened yet. And he says, when it does, it's going to be bad. It's going to be dreadful. All right, during well, he's really referring to mostly the last 3.5 year period. And most people who talk about the 7-year tribulation period will say you've got 3.5 years of bad stuff and 3.5 years of, oh my gosh, this is horrible stuff, the worst stuff ever to happen. All right. Now, I'm throwing this all out there to kind of explain to you where this idea of a 7-year tribulation period in the future comes from and what some of the arguments are. This is not a universal view within the Christian church. All right, it's not. Some scholars look at that prophecy of 77s and think of it's more figurative language, just meaning a really, really long time. Think of Jesus saying, well, Lord, how many times should I forgive my neighbor? 7 times? No, how about 70 times 7? All right, Jesus didn't literally mean you should be multiplying 70 times 7, figuring out what the answer is, and that's how many times you have to forgive someone, all right? That wasn't the point. He was using figurative language to say, you have to keep doing it, all right? You just have to keep doing it. So some scholars look at this prophecy and think that's what's going on, that we're not meant to calculate specific time frames from this. It's just saying there's going to be a long time between when these events are all happening, all right? Other scholars think that this prophecy is referring to specific events, but it's referring to specific events that already happened, all right? So they don't necessarily think this calculates all the way out to AD 30 like we've talked about. For example, there was a king, Antiochus Epiphanes, who sacrificed a pig on the altar in about 168, 167 BC, all right? The abomination that causes desolation. They say that sacrifice of sacrificing a pig, which keep in mind, pigs were not kosher, in the Jewish tradition, so that would be considered an abomination, that they think that was the abomination that caused desolation. Others say that this was all fulfilled when the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD, all right? But, the view that the questioner here was getting at is this one I've been kind of covering and explaining, which is that this prophecy is referring to a future period of 7 years of great tribulation, all right? That's where that comes from. Now, this is also one of those questions, because I'm telling you, different Christians disagree on this. It's funny because, the unit we're covering in my class right now is we're talking about the Apostles' Creed. And I told my students yesterday, I said, the Apostles' Creed is a good summary of what I call mere Christianity, what's frankly C.S. Lewis calls mere Christianity. These are the core principles of what defines a Christian and what unites us, no matter what our denomination is, all right? You'll notice that, whether or not there is a 7-year tribulation and a rapture is not included in the Apostles' Creed, all right? This is one of those peripheral issues that, yes, it is important, but it should not separate us. We should not divide ourselves and say, you have to believe this in order to truly be a Christian. You have to be pre-tribulation rapture, or you have to be amillennial, or whatever your position is, in order to be a true Christian. We can disagree reasonably about this and still be one body of Christ. That being said, I do agree. My seminary professor said that he felt that there was a lot of people out there in the world that don't study and don't preach. A lot of pastors don't preach, for example, on eschatology. Eschatology is the fancy theological word for the last things, the study of the end times, what's going to happen at the end. And he said he takes issue with a lot of these pastors that don't preach on those things and don't teach it all, because they act like that's not as important as the other stuff. And he says, well, it was important enough for God to include in his word. I mean, there's stuff in the Bible. If God felt it was important enough to include in his message to us, then why don't we feel like it's important enough for us to study and learn from? And I agree with him on that. I do think that we should be studying it just like anything else in God's word, and it is an important subject to explore. It's just also important to ask, well, what's the point of God telling us? Why is he telling us these things? What's the lesson we're supposed to take out of it? And not let differences of opinion on this cause too much internal strife and division within the church. That's not the point. If it's getting to the point, there's a lot of people that get so dogmatic about this that they get, I've seen people get pretty angry in discussions about this. If that's happening, it's time to back off the conversation and let cooler heads prevail, because that is certainly not the point. So it is important to study because it is part of God's word, but it shouldn't be dividing us. So a related question then, and that the questioner asked, is about the rapture and when the rapture is going to happen. Well, a lot of people out there may be wondering, first of all, well, Ken, what the heck is a rapture? What are we even talking about here? And there's, again, a few Bible verses that this is refers to, but the primary one comes from 1 Thessalonians. All right, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I'm going to read verses 15 through 17, and then we'll look back and see what exactly is being described here. All right, here's what it says. This is the Apostle Paul writing. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. All right. So the idea here is that at some point, Jesus is going to resurrect believers, Christian believers who have already died, all right? And then after he resurrects Christian believers who have already died, all right, any Christian believers who are still alive at that time will be caught up in the clouds. They will be lifted up in the clouds, and they will meet Jesus along with these other believers, all right, the believers who had passed away. Some people look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 41. They think that's also describing a rapture. That actually says, for example, 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill, one will be taken and the other left. And people say, well, that's the rapture. And that's the imagery you see, for example, if you've ever watched the Left Behind movies or read the Left Behind books, where you'll see literally people just disappear and vanish. You know, that's kind of where that idea comes from. Yeah.
Oh, the Thanos snap.
The what? The Thanos snap, yeah. The Thanos snap. Although that was sad. I don't think the rapture is going to have us all get dusted.
Well, I mean, it'll be sad for everyone who's left, just like in the movie.
That is true, but I'm sorry, I don't want to spoil anything. Well, no, the movie's been out long enough. Tough, you got to get spoiled. Peter Parker did not look like he was happy to be snapped. Okay, Mr. Stark. Yeah, no, I mean,
I don't want to go, Mr. Stark.
That was evil. That was horrible of them to do that to us.
Yeah.
And you don't want to torture my daughter. You can remind her of that. She did not take that well when we saw that in the movie theater, and I don't blame her. That was horrible. Anyway, so that's where that kind of comes from, this idea that people, the true believers, are just going to literally vanish and be caught up with Jesus. Now, the question then, and there's disagreement again within the Christian church about this. Number one, there's disagreement whether or not this really is even describing a rapture per se, or just what's going to happen at the end times, at the end of time, But the schools that talk about it as a rapture, and the rapture being something different from the final resurrection, fall in kind of 3 general camps, and there's nuances within these camps. But you have the pre-tribulation rapture folks. They're the ones that say there's going to be a rapture, and that is what ushers in that 7 years of tribulation. So it's rapture, then 7 years of tribulation, then Jesus returns for good, at the end of the 7-year tribulation period. Then there's mid-tribulation rapture, which is, remember we talked about 3.5 years in, that's when you're going to have the abomination that causes desolation. I said that the first 3.5 years are bad, but the last 3.5 years are even worse. So some people put the rapture right there at that midpoint, all right? And then the third camp is post-tribulation rapture, which is 7 years of tribulation, and then the rapture, all right? If you are hoping, student of mine who may or may not watch this after asking the question, that I'm going to tell you which one is true, you are in for disappointment. That I'm not going to do, and partly because, again, there are some very good and very knowledgeable theologians that will be very emphatic about one view or the other view or this view or that view. I am not one of them. I am one of my kind of stance on these things. Like I said before, I think it is important to study. I think it is valuable to study. I have no firm, defined, definitive conclusions one way or another. I am open to any of these options. I think there are pros and cons to all of them. I am not convinced 100% by any of the arguments that they definitely 100% certainly have it right. So my attitude is, hey, whatever Jesus wants to do, go for it. I'm good with that. But let me talk to you a little bit about where these views come from as far as, at least, pre and post-trib rapture. People who believe in a post-tribulation rapture, for example, that you're going to have the 7 years of tribulation and then this rapture at the end, they will look at that same Matthew passage I read to you before about, two women will be grinding at the handmill, one will be taking the other left. But they look at the surrounding context. And they say if you read that passage in its surrounding context, it clearly seems to be talking about something at the end of time, at the end of when Jesus is finally coming back and accompanying Jesus' return, not something that's happening 7 years before Jesus is going to return. We started in verse 36 of, again, Matthew 24, if you want to open up your Bibles and follow along, looking at verse 36. But about that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill. One will be taken and the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this. If the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour you do not expect him. All right. If you look at this in context, all right, it certainly seems to be describing something that happens at the same time as Jesus' return. All right. If that is true, and if this is describing the rapture, then that would say the rapture happens at the time Jesus returns. And everybody agrees the time Jesus returns is at the end of the tribulation. All right. So those folks will look at this passage and say clearly it's describing the rapture as being something that happens at the end of the tribulation, not at the beginning. All right. Now, those who believe in a pre-tribulation rapture will respond to this by saying, well, we don't think this even is describing the rapture. All right. They say if you look at that 1 Thessalonians passage, all right, it's the rapture as it's described in 1 Thessalonians isn't just a matter of Jesus lifting people up to him, all right, or resurrecting people. It's got this idea about meeting Jesus in the air. And there's nothing in this Matthew passage about meeting people in the air. So they claim that this Matthew, there's still the pre-tribulation rapture, but this Matthew passage is talking about a resurrection. I mean, think that there will be people who come to believe during the tribulation, according to this view. And so this passage is talking about people being resurrected who were not part of that rapture at the beginning and have now been are being resurrected at the end. They died during that 7-year period, a tribulation period. To that I respond, maybe. But here's one of the reasons why I say I'm not 100% convinced one way or the other. You ever heard the phrase, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence? Yeah. So what the argument here is they look at this passage in Matthew and they say, well, it doesn't include a description of meeting in the air. To which I say, okay, that doesn't mean there wasn't a meeting in the air. Let me give you an example. All right, what I mean by that. I'm going to describe to you my day today. All right, but just things I did. I won't talk about all the things that frustrated the heck out of BA and I. So today, what did I do? I helped broadcast our chapel service this morning.
Yep.
I met with our middle school director at one point today. I met with our IT director at one point today. I met with our operations director at one point today. I actually went out to our operations director's house because we got a film shoot there next week, and I needed to scout the location. All right. If based on me telling you that list of things I did today, can you conclude one way or another whether or not I drove my daughter home today? BA knows the answer to what I really did. I mean, I gave you a list of things that I did, and every single thing in that statement was true. I did all of those things.
He did.
Right? The fact that I didn't include in the list the fact that I took my daughter home doesn't mean I didn't take my daughter home. Just because that part of the description of my day wasn't there, it just means I didn't include that in the description for one reason or another. I mean, I also breathed however many times a minute. I didn't tell you that. That doesn't mean I was holding my breath all day long, all right? Just because something's not listed doesn't mean it didn't happen. And logically, you can't conclude that, all right? So the response, at least, that's given by the pre-tribulation camp, and specifically this was one that was raised by my seminary professor. But the reason that response doesn't really respond to the argument is because it's a classic example of absence of evidence does not equal evidence of absence. Just because something isn't listed doesn't mean it didn't happen. There's nothing in this Matthew passage that would be inconsistent with these people meeting Jesus in the air when they're resurrected. All right, it just didn't mention it. All right, and so this may still be explaining the rapture. Now, is this also consistent with what the pre-tribulation rapture people say? Yep, it could be interpreted either way, which is why I'm not solidly in either camp. All right, what about the pre-tribulation argument? I'll give you one argument in favor of the pre-tribulation folks who say they think the Bible teaches this rapture is going to happen at the beginning of that 7-year period of time. Well, they look to the book of Revelation, and the book of Revelation starts out with some letters of caution, advice, and condemnation to some of the area churches, and then it launches into a vision that was given to the Apostle John about future events, all right? And people who are pre-tribulation rapture folks, and others as well, look to this vision that was given to John, and they say this is describing... Well, largely, it's describing in more detail what's going to happen during that 7-year tribulation period, and then some other things as well. So that really, I'm not going to go into all of those things about the trumpets and the bowls and all of that. You can, study that, and I encourage you to. I think it is valuable. But basically, the book of Revelation goes into much more detail about what happens during that 7-year tribulation period. Well, people who believe in a pre-tribulation rapture look at the book of Revelation. They say, you know what you notice in the book of Revelation? In those first 3 chapters, when John is relaying these visions that were given to him, what he was supposed to say to these various different area churches, he uses the word ecclesia, the Greek word ecclesia, which is where we translate church, 19 times in those 3 verses. And then that word church does not appear again until chapter 22, when John is again addressing first century church. The entire time that he's having this vision and describing the events of the tribulation, that word ecclesia is never used. All right? And so those who believe in a pre-tribulation rapture say this shows that the church, i.e. believers, is not there when all of this is happening, when all of this is going on. I hate to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but my response when I hear that is, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's the same type of argument. Is it possible, based upon that what God was trying to communicate to that vision was that the church wasn't there during the 7-year tribulation period? Sure, it's possible, all right? But the mere fact that word is not used, that in and of itself does not mean that the church was not there. I just think it's one of those things where, interesting. Okay, maybe, but not definitively. All right. So to wrap all of this up, is there going to be a 7-year period of tribulation? Well, that depends on how you interpret Daniel's prophecy. All right. If you think that these 69 sevens were pointing specifically to the year 30 AD, and that there's going to be another future 7-year period, then yeah, there's going to be a 7-year period of tribulation. And I will tell you this, on that I do have an opinion. I tend to fall in that camp, all right? I think it's just far too much of a coincidence that it works out right to basically the time when Jesus died. And it doesn't even have to, because lots of times the Bible just uses round numbers. I mean, we know 7 is kind of a number of completion. So if you know anything about the way Old Testament prophecy and everything works, I don't think we even need to expect it to fall that exactly to the year 30 AD. But it does, and that's, at least if we're right as far as the year of that command to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And to me, that's a little hard to ignore. We have copies that are older than Jesus's birth, so we know this prophecy existed beforehand, and it still works out that specifically. That's pretty remarkable to me. So I do tend to think that is probably what Daniel's prophecy was about, in my personal opinion. As far as whether there's going to be a true rapture or whether these rapture passages are just referring to the resurrection of believers when Jesus returns, that I'm not as dogmatic about. I'm not dogmatic about either one either. To each their own. I don't think it matters ultimately to our salvation. But I'm kind of more on the fence about, when that rapture is going to happen. Some people say it will happen before that 7-year period. Some say it'll happen in the middle. Some say it'll happen at the end. But I teased earlier that while I do think it's important to study these questions, to study the prophetic books and the prophecies in the Bible, because God gave them to us for a reason, I think when we study them, we need to ask, what reason? What was the reason? Why did God give us this information? Because that ultimately should be guiding our study and guiding our priorities, all right? And if we look at that passage I read you from the book of Matthew, we get a very clear idea of why God told us these prophecies and revealed them to us. And again, starting in verse 42 of Matthew chapter 24, or not Matthew 24, I'm sorry. Matthew 24. Jesus said this, therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. All right? Jesus told us why he was revealing these facts about the end times to us. And the reason he was is because you don't know when it's going to happen. It could happen at any moment. And so we are being encouraged to live every moment of our lives as if Jesus could come back right then. All right? I ask you this, and this is something I ask a lot of my classes. It's something I ask myself. It's one of those little life philosophies I try to follow. If Jesus came back right now, how would he feel about what he caught you doing? If you're doing something that you wouldn't want him walking in on, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Not maybe, you shouldn't be doing it, all right? And of course, in reality, Jesus knows what you're doing anyway, but there's something in our fallen human nature that we feel like we need someone physically there. Well, Jesus is going to be physically here sometime. And that is what Jesus is, the point of him telling us all these prophecies, is to let us know that you don't know when it's going to happen. Only Jesus didn't know it was going to happen. Only the Father knows when it's going to happen. All right? And that's the point. Because if you knew it was going to happen, then you probably wouldn't be living every day of your life like it could happen at any moment. All right? I mean, oh my gosh. The king at the council, or the Emperor Constantine. Emperor Constantine, I don't know if this is historically true or not. It's a story you hear a lot. That Emperor Constantine, even though he liked Christianity and he was the emperor, he made it the official religion of the Roman Empire, he himself actually did not get baptized right away. He waited to get baptized until he was going to die. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because he felt that once he was baptized, he was going to have to change his life and change the way he did things. And so he didn't want to do that. And so he was putting it off. The same thing. If you knew when Jesus was going to come back and you knew it wasn't going to be, until X number of years down the road, then you kind of lose your sense of urgency to live for him today. I mean, yes, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow, all right, but most of us, let's face it, we don't live that way. We don't think that way. We're always planning for the future and looking ahead. Unless we are faced with some kind of imminent, serious medical condition, health condition, things like that, we don't think that way. All right. And so Jesus wants us, however, to realize that he can come back any moment. And so you should be living your life that way. So my wife is commenting, she had a question whether we were still streaming. And she says, I guess that answers my question about if you're still streaming. She commented on YouTube. Yes, we are, but we're wrapping it up. I will tell you that thing that I just said also about, Jesus, the point of Jesus telling all this was to show that we should be living every moment as if he could be coming back at any time. And we don't know when it's going to happen. He didn't know what's going to happen. That is something that, to me, counts is one mark. And again, I'm not convinced one way or the other. I could be persuaded potentially anyway. But that does, to me, mark against a pre-tribulation rapture. and maybe against a literal 7-year tribulation to begin with. But case in point, if we have a pre-tribulation rapture, and that pre-tribulation rapture marks the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period, then that rapture is not going to be, you're not going to be able to fail to notice that it happens. People all of a sudden disappear, move off the face of the earth. All right, then I could just say, all right, start the watch. 7 years from now, that's when Jesus is coming back. And you would know. You would know when he's coming. But that seems to me to run directly counter to what Jesus himself said. He said, you won't know when I'm coming. All right? You're not supposed to know when I'm coming. And so that is one of the reasons, and I'm sure there's people who believe in a pre-tribulation rapture who will tell me that I'm wrong to have that concern. And again, I'm not saying there's not a pre-tribulation rapture. As I said, I'm not convinced one way or the other. I think it could go either way. But that, I will admit, is one thing that troubles me about the pre-tribulation rapture position, is that it does tend to, maybe not to the second, maybe not to the moment, but at least give you a way to calculate to a pretty good idea of when Jesus is going to return, so you could kind of wait to clean up your act, or people will do that. We know it's going to be a tribulation period. People are going to die. People are going to suffer. So they shouldn't put it off. But one thing we've learned in the way human nature is right now is that people still will put it off if they think they've got time. All right? So that's what I have to say about that. Did I answer the question? Probably not. But at least hopefully I've explained what the different views are out there, and that this is not something that should divide the Christian church. We can disagree about this and still be one body of Christ, but I do encourage people not to shy away from studying it, all right? And maybe when you study it, you'll come to a different conclusion than I do, and that's fine. That's great, because you know what? In order to do that, you know what you have to do? You got to open up your Bible and get into it, and that's a good thing. That's what God wants you to do. So to all the pastors out there, I'll say, don't shy away from preaching about it. Teach about it. For all of you doing Bible studies, do Bible study about it, learn about it, and then, hey, let's talk about it and see where we all come down. All right? Anything else, BA? Anything on Facebook or anything you want to add?
No. But if you do have any questions about it, you can ask him stuff.
And you can ask me stuff by going to our website, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff.
There you go.
And submit the question there. You can also comment below. If you're not watching us live, you watch us after the fact, throw your comment in the comment section down there below, and we can see what your thoughts are. Share your thoughts. Like I said, this is something that Christians do in good nature disagree about, so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it. Where you agree with me, where you disagree with me, that's great. That's the kind of conversation we should be having with gentleness and respect. And, of course, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got a lot of good things coming up. I think we are probably really close to having a new episode of the 513 show coming out. I do think I said on a previous episode that we are probably not going to release until January. I might change my mind on that. Just because of our shooting schedule, we're going to be filming another episode. And so I may actually, I don't want to have release two of them right back to back. So since this one is getting close to being ready to go, we might be releasing a new episode of 513 show. I don't have a definitive date on that yet, though, so don't quote me on it. Excuse me. I do want to say one last thing before we close, real quick, just to let people know that the plan as of right now is that we are going to have an episode of Hey Ask Me Stuff next week at 3 o'clock. It probably will not be a live episode. It will be a pre-recorded episode because, again, I got to work out some scheduling, but we're probably going to have a film shoot next Wednesday afternoon. And so making sure that that's wrapped up and we're back here in time to go live might be problematic. So our plan is to still do an episode. It will premiere. So for all of you that are familiar with YouTube premieres, for all intents and purposes, it'll kind of look like it's a live stream, but just know it'll probably be pre-recorded. But I think we're still going to try to make that happen. It is Christmas season, so the reason I'm telling you all this is because sometimes things don't go according to plan. Right, BA?
Yeah.
How much of your plan did you get done today?
I came in without a plan because it would have been dashed on the rocks.
Yeah, that's pretty much the day we've had. All right, well, speaking of plans, I got more stuff to do. I've got to go teach another class and all that jazz. So we got to get going. But thank you very much for BA for everything that you did today.
You didn't call me beautiful.
I did not call you beautiful.
Good
but
job.
You are...
Okay, no, that's enough. Thank you.
Not when my wife is watching. All right. And thank you to my wife for commenting, just checking on whether we were done or not. Hey, honey, we're about to be done. All right. And thank you all for watching. See you next week. God bless.